It's a pretty just kind of short summary of the things we were going to discuss tonight.
Thank you. Okay, so this is our post-secondary planning for junior parents and guardians. So I am Mrs. Toto, Jamie Toto. I am one of the school counselors. This is Mr. Capolino. He is the school counselor for last names P to Z.
Yep, P to Z.
I am for last names GR to O. Mrs. Smith, unfortunately, could not join us tonight, but she has the first part of the alphabet, so A to GO. All right. So on the slide, hopefully you guys have our contact information. Obviously, reach out at any point to us. And so we have created a Google Classroom for your students and their graduating class. They have all joined this Google Classroom. It is primarily to share information. So this is where we're going to share some tutorials for things involving post-secondary, some resources, some references. So there's nothing on here that includes assignments for students. It's just a place for us to kind of house everything for them and for their graduating class. So parents, guardians, families, you are welcome to join this Google Classroom as well. And like I mentioned, we will also send this out so you can join at a later point, or if you need your student to show you how to join a Google Classroom, they can show you later on as well. So the goals for today, so we're going to mostly be talking about the process of applying to a 2- or 4-year school, really understanding the steps of the process that are needed to be completed, especially by the end of this year. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the SATs and the ACTs. So the school counseling and the college application process. So this spring, what your students should be doing right now is focusing on their classes, focusing on their grades. The transcript that gets sent to colleges when students apply includes freshman year, sophomore year, and junior year. That is often why they say junior year is so important, because that's the last year that will be on a student's transcripts and students apply in the fall. So the spring seminar we are doing with students, we did it this past Monday and Tuesday. We are meeting with all of you today. We will be holding individual student meetings for the remainder of the spring and the year. We can absolutely meet with parents upon request, and then we are having this now. And then in the fall, we'll be having a similar kind of setting for a senior fall seminar to kind of touch base with you again about where your students will be at that point. We'll still be doing more individual student meetings and kind of setting your student up on a plan where we meet with them rather every week if they need it, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, whatever they need to make sure that they are on track. We will be having hopefully some sort of college fair. Last year or this past fall, we did not have one in person for obvious reasons with COVID.
Daisy.
We've been having a lot of individual colleges come into the school, so we'll continue to do that next year. A financial aid night and then a senior parent college night as well. So the college application timeline overview. This I'm just going to briefly mention. We're going to go into pretty much each of these things more in depth in future slides tonight, so we won't spend too much time on it right now. So in the spring right now, students can be visiting college campuses. We have been telling students that if you can wait a little bit until it's nicer out, there's flowers, students are actually out and about, it helps to get kind of a better feel of the school and the community. Explore college options by doing college searches. We'll talk about building a college application list in Naviance. We'll talk a little bit about letters of recommendation, scheduling interviews with admission counselors at top choice colleges. This is not something that every student needs to do. Many students do not do this. They are more of conversations with admissions counselors instead of interviews. So this would be for a student who really, really has an interest in a specific college. They really want to get in there. They want to kind of do anything they can to put a name to the face and a face to the name, to the application. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. The SATs, take the SATs, maintain good grades, get involved. This summer, and again, I know we're speeding through this, but we'll talk all about it in depth a little bit later. Finish or write your college essay, start to fill out your common application, fill out some other documents we have, a senior information sheet, a parent brag sheet, get involved or work. And something we stress to your students, clean up social media. We are definitely shocked that so many students have public social media accounts. Even if they are being careful with what they post, it's also important to be mindful of what their friends are tagging them in, because
I'll be back.
Google as well.
I'll be right back.
So pretty much every college and admissions has dedicated people in the admissions office whose sole job is to look up students, on social media, to look up students just on Google, on the internet, to see kind of what they can find. So please just remind your student to be mindful of that, and just be careful of what they're tagged in as well.
Okay.
So post-secondary options. College is not the option for everyone. That is completely okay. We are not the type of department that forces students to apply to college, four-year colleges. If they're looking at other options, 100% we will help them figure that out and support them. So four-year colleges and universities, those application dates range from the fall to the spring. Two-year colleges, which is more of your community college, those applications are usually done in the spring, unless there's a specialized program. So for example, I had a student last year who was applying to QCC for their dental hygiene program. That's actually a really competitive program there. There's a waiting list, so that application is due earlier than springtime. There's also technical schools and trade schools. Those are for more specific major specific kind of career interests that a student might want to pursue. So those applications range also from the fall to the spring. Military, absolutely, we have branches of military that come into the school still and set up. So students have to be 18, they have to receive a high school diploma to be able to join. And then a gap year. Some students need time, some students need a gap year, completely fine. We just recommend that there's a plan for that gap year, whether that's volunteer work or working a job or taking one class somewhere, just doing something so that they don't get completely separated from their end goal. Okay, so preparing for the application process. Grades and senior year classes do matter. So even though the college evaluates the whole application, GPA is a strong factor. Getting good grades in challenging courses is what college admissions do value a lot. They do look at a student as a whole. They will look at a student if your student had a tough freshman year, had a tough sophomore year. Obviously, COVID came into play, especially for your students, and they understand that. The thing that's the most important is that they see a student's potential and a student's growth. So if your student is going on an upward trajectory, that's awesome. That's what they're looking for. But it is important, even though senior year.
Do you want to hear this or no? You do? Okay.
No, that's not fine.
Oh.
I already heard that.
Okay.
If everyone can just mute, sorry, if everyone can just.
I'm gonna mute all. Hopefully
Okay.
that doesn't mute you too. Oh, it didn't. Oh, it's mute. It's muting you. I think you can hit mute all if you hit participants at the bottom, Jamie.
All right, I think it worked.
Yeah.
All right. So even though when a student applies in the fall to college and they don't have any senior year grades, colleges will ask for senior year grades. They'll ask for grades at the mid-year point. Some schools will ask for grades after Q1 their senior year. So I know some seniors get super excited about senior year, which they should be, but they still do need to be working hard during senior year as well. Extracurricular activities. So admissions is looking obviously at the courses students are taking and grades, but they also want to see what kind of person your student is. extracurricular activities have been difficult. They've been interrupted, obviously, by COVID. Admissions gets that. They understand that. The thing that's most important is that a student is involved in something. They want someone on their campus or in their community that is going to be part of their community. So if a student has to work and has been working a lot, that counts. I personally in high school, I was not able to do many extracurriculars. I worked pretty much every day after school. That holds just as much weight as any other extracurricular. If a student has to take care of a sibling after school while parents are still working, that counts. All these things count, and there's places to put this in the application, and we'll make sure your student knows where that is. Okay, so this is where it gets a little confusing. And again, we'll sit down with each of the juniors individually to go over this. So there are 3 main online databases that are used in the college application process: the Common App, the College Board, and Naviance. So College Board is used for a lot of things, but in terms of the college application process, it is mainly used for SAT scores and just searching for colleges. So everyone's big question, SATs. So many colleges and universities are continuing their test optional policy. So this means that a college does not need the SAT to review an applicant's application. It's optional. The tough part is that we do not know, it's not a blanket statement for all the colleges. So it is up to the student to make sure whatever college they are thinking of or applying to, that they are looking to see what their test policy is. What I have been telling students is, which they probably hate me for, but I would highly recommend that all current juniors take the SAT if they are applying to college. The worst thing is looking to apply to a college and then realizing the last minute that they require the SAT and you never took it. Obviously, the SAT has certain days. It takes weeks to get scores back. It takes weeks to send the scores. So if you don't have it done and in your back pocket, that can be an issue. Another thing, and another reason I say this as well, is there are some colleges as a whole who are not requiring the SATs for admission. But if you are applying into a competitive major, nursing is an example. I had a student this year whose college she was applying to. The college doesn't require SATs, but the major that she is applying into, nursing, does. So that can be tricky. We can absolutely help your student look into this if they ask us for that help, but ultimately I would recommend that they take it. Also, the good thing about taking the SAT, and I explained this to students the past 2 days, is that we can help you decipher if your score is something that you should send to schools or not. When you take the SAT, the score does not automatically go to the colleges. So they don't need to be worried if it's test optional schools and they take the SAT. I had some students this year say, oh no, I shouldn't have taken it. Now they're gonna see it. It's not true. As long as you don't send them, there's no issue at all. So if a school is test optional, it will not impact a student's application if they do not send scores. So what that means is if Susie is applying to Bridgewater State and she decides to not send her SAT scores, Bridgewater State admissions will not say, oh, Susie did not send her SAT scores. That must mean she did really bad on them. They will not make those conclusions or jump to any of those conclusions. If they don't send the SATs, they are not part of the application. On the flip side, if they do send the SATs, they are a factor in their application. So again, look through the students' list of colleges just to see their updated testing policy. It's very visual on most of the college websites. You can type in the college in Google and put test policy, it'll come right up. And then if your student does take the SAT or the ACT and they would like to send their scores, they have to send them. That's a big misconception that counselors can send SAT scores. We cannot, even if we wanted to, we cannot. We actually don't have access to students' College Board accounts at all. We actually won't even know their SAT scores unless they tell us what they got on the SAT. So we have no connection with College Board. So a student has to send it themselves. I can absolutely help students send them if they come to me. I've had a few students want to do it with me in my office to make sure it's all set. Totally fine, but they do have to send them. And I didn't really mention the ACT that much. It's a different entrance exam. It is less popular in this area. I have not come across a school in the past 5 years that has required the ACT. If anything, they require the SAT, but not the ACT. The ACT is a little different. It's formatted different. It has some science on it. It's a little bit shorter. It has a different grading scale. So that can be used, that can be done. I would not just do the ACT though. I would make sure to do the SAT. So there's a few upcoming test dates. There's one in March. I personally don't suggest March. I just worry that the math that juniors are learning this year, that they won't have enough of that math knowledge to do well on the SATs. So I always recommend the May or the June dates. We also did mention to students that if they are in an AP class right now, they might also just want to be mindful of when their AP exams are, because that can just be a lot of testing at the same time. Students do not have to take the SAT in or near Uxbridge. If they are someone who wants to get away from Uxbridge, they don't want to be around other students they might know, they can take it 30 minutes from here, 40, wherever they want to take it. The deadlines to register are about a month before the test date. I would register earlier the better. I did have a student, I think it was last year, who registered to take the SAT. They registered like the week before and they ended up having to take it about an hour away. It was the only seat that was available. Because if you think about it, pretty much every junior in the state is taking the SATs. So you can go onto College Board to register. It's super simple, but obviously we can help with that if you have any issues. So the second database that we use in the process is Naviance. Your students should be decently acquainted with it. We recently went into classrooms also in, I think it was December. We did a personality module with them. So that's all on Naviance. They're used to it. They should have their logins. This is the one portal that we can reset usernames and passwords. So we can help with that if anyone's confused. Parents don't have portals on Naviance, it's just students. So this is where we send stuff. We send the students transcripts, we send the students grades, we send the letters of recommendation. There's some college searches on here. So again, this is a ton of information. Naviance is kind of one of the biggest pieces of the college process. So students can search for colleges on Naviance. They can like them, heart them, save them to their colleges that they're interested in and they're thinking about. They can read about the colleges, they can get more information about the majors. What's really, really important, and we stress this with your students as well, they need to make sure the colleges that they are applying to are listed in the colleges I am applying to section of Naviance. This is super important because otherwise we don't know where they're applying to. If they say something in the hallway, we need them to put it in Naviance. That's the only way we're going to be able to send their material. So every year there's always a student or two who says, hey, did you send my stuff to, I keep saying Bridgewater State. And we say, is it in Naviance? Because if it's not in Naviance, then no. And if it's not in Naviance, then that's a problem. We do check in with students to make sure that they are updating it regularly, but if you can also just kind of help and remind them that it's important they list their colleges in Naviance. It's also important because they can choose their deadline. So when they add a school, they add UMass Boston, it will give them the options of the deadlines that they might want to choose. Once they choose that deadline, we can see the deadlines. So we can see that Susie has an application deadline of December 1st. So I'm going to make sure that Susie's grades and transcripts and everything are sent to that school by December 1st. Supermatch is that kind of college searching tool. So it allows students to choose kind of their like perfect campus, what they want to major in, different clubs, activities that they would want, locations, states. You can narrow it down to a lot of different places. So Supermatch allows students to do that. And then again, from those results, students can then like the college, which will save it. They can move it into the colleges I want to apply to. So that's a really helpful tool. Letter of recommendation, we're going to talk about the actual nitty gritty of that with Mr. Coppolino in a little bit, but the more technical side of letter of recommendations, it's all done through Naviance. So students are not walking around, they're not physically getting any letters, they're not snail mailing it in. They choose their teachers' names on Naviance. Naviance sends their teacher an email to their own portal. The teacher writes a recommendation on the portal and the teacher sends it in through the portal. So students, it's pretty hands-off for students after they just request them in Naviance. The other neat thing about Naviance is that you can actually go into a specific college. So I give the example of WPI. We have a lot of students who apply there. You can click admissions, the admissions tab in a specific college, and you can actually see what other Uxbridge student profiles have been accepted or denied to that school. So it will not obviously say a student's name, but it'll show class of 2020, GPA of a 97, and an SAT of a 1050. This student got into WPI. Or it'll show another set of stats. This student did not get into WPI. And it shows it in a really good visual graph way. And it also kind of plots where your student is in that graph so they can visually see if it might be a target, a reach, or a safety school. So that's helpful too.
I guess it's my turn. So hi again. So I want to talk about creating your college list. And by now, your child might be thinking about kind of a general list of schools that they want to apply to. And we give them advice along the way. We have a general, this is a very general rule. It's a 3-4-3 rule where students will choose like a reach school, a 3 reach schools, 4 match schools, and 3 safety schools. And in general, we're, GPA is like really the biggest factor in determining whether a school is a reach, match, or safety. And I'll just give an example. If a school, most colleges will report their average GPA from the previous year for admitted freshman students. And they usually give like a range, an average range, say 3.2 to 3.4 was the average GPA of a admitted student. If your son and daughter has a 3.0, a school that has, an average GPA of a 3.2 to 3.4, that might be, kind of a reach. If they have a 3.3 or 3.4 and they fall right in that range where that's the average admitted student, that might be a match school. And then if your son or daughter has a 3.7 GPA where their credentials are a lot better than the average admitted student, that would be more of a safety school. So we use GPA a lot to help drive the college list. And as Jamie said, in Naviance, there's a Supermatch tool and students use it. If you see at the bottom here, you can look by major, you can look by school size, where it's located. Is it rural? Is it urban? You can take into account the cost of the school, how much merit aid it offers. So these search engines are really helpful in developing that list. And then we'll advise your child too along the way based on our knowledge, having worked with some of these schools. You can move on, yeah. So visiting college campuses, the spring, like Jimmy said, is a really good time of year. Going for a tour, I think, is really important. Your child should go look at the schools they're applying to. It really helps them make an informed decision. They want to really see the school, see the campus, meet other students, look at the facilities, look at the cafeteria, those sorts of things, look at the dorms. For college interviews, if they're on campus, it's always a good idea to maybe set up an interview. If you know your child's going to be on campus, they can call an admissions counselor and set up a meeting. A lot of those interviews are they're more informational. They're not used to evaluate a student. More selective schools, they might require an interview, or they might make an interview optional. If an interview is required or even optional, we would say the student should go on the interview. An optional interview is definitely an evaluative interview, so they should take advantage of that. We've offered a document on our Google Classroom. If your child goes on a tour, it's just a list of questions they might ask while they're on campus. So, and we directed them to that. So that's a good tool if they go on a tour and they have some questions they might want to ask. Letters of recommendation. So a lot of schools require 2 letters of recommendation, some even 3. Those are typically written by teachers, and then there's a 3rd letter that the guidance counselor writes. So our recommendation to our students is before the end of the year to go ask a teacher, 2 teachers for a letter, just so the teachers are aware that this is coming down the pike. There's a couple of documents that we use to help teachers and counselors write letters. Both documents are found on the Google Classroom. One of them is the senior information sheet. And then as another one is the parent brag sheet that you'll fill out. And we use those to really kind of round out our letters and polish them up.
So those sheets are actually, I think they're available on there now. So really at any point, if it's something that you or your student wants to get done by the end of the school year, I just like to remind students, some students get really hung up on these. They do not go to colleges. They do not need to be these perfect information sheets. They're truly just for us. So we can pull some information from it, but they can complete that really at any time if that's something they want to get done earlier.
So who do students ask for letters? And the advice we give them is if a student struggles in a class in the past, say they first quarter, they don't do that well, and then they kind of pour it on after and pull their grade up and overcome a struggle where they persist. Those are really good teachers to ask. It's really easy for a teacher to write a good letter that shows that a student is persistent and overcomes things. If your child's had a teacher a few times over the course of their years at Oxford High School, that kind of a teacher would be a good person to ask. And then sometimes a student has a good relationship with the teacher. They just work really well. They have good rapport, and they just kind of hit it off. Those are good teachers to ask. Another option is if a student has somebody outside of the school, they can ask like a coach, or if they have a manager at someplace they work to write a letter. But though that's considered supplemental information that admission counselors, they're so busy that it's hard enough for them to get to the required information, let alone to get to supplemental. So, we wouldn't say no to that. The counselors can forward that to colleges, but our sense is they don't generally get weighed too much into the decision process.
Sometimes we see too, if a student gets deferred from a college, which means they're not completely denied, but they're going to kind of reassess them in like a later applicant pool. Sometimes then those extra letters of recommendation would be something that we would recommend sending along to kind of help support their application even more. But probably at that point is really the only point that they will really take them into consideration.
Yeah. Your child should talk to teachers before the end of the year, just to let them know that they'll want a letter in the fall, and then once later on they'll have to actually submit the request through Naviance, and we work with our students on that process. It's pretty straightforward.
We also have, just so you know too, we, like Mr. Capolino said, we sit with them and we make sure that, gets done. But we also have tutorials in our Google Classroom page that has videos of how exactly to request them on Naviance. So all of these kind of tasks they have to do, there's video tutorials on Classroom so that if they don't reach out to us for some reason, they can still access that information.
So the Common App, you may have heard of it, but that is the application, the software application that most students use to apply for colleges. It's a site where your student sets up a login. They fill out one application and then they're able to electronically send it to a lot of schools just with a click of a button. So on the Common App, they fill out the application, they upload an essay that's required through Common App. Each college will have their own supplemental questions that your child will need to answer. And then when they're complete, they just submit it. And then at once they can apply to their whole list of schools oftentimes. So the Common App, just if you're curious, it's commonapp.org. It's really easy to set up an account. I have a dummy account on it that I use because my students always have questions. So I've created an account. You can too if you want. Just require some basic identifying information. And then we just tell our students to use their legal name. And there's an option where they select to apply as a first-year student. So we ask them to choose that option. And the Common App kind of rolls over in August. So everything kind of resets. And so that's when students will set up their account typically in August because there's a rollover. And then next year's applicants can start using it once the rollover happens. So the college essay, maybe you've heard of your child talking about this. They might be working on it in their English class this year, but the Common App requires it. And the length of it is about 250 to 650 words. And they will, if it's more than that, they'll require you to edit it. So it has to be chopped down. I've had students having to really scale down longer essays. On the Common App, the essay prompts are supplied, and there's a group of them that students can select from. And we just kind of advise them to select one that really speaks to their strengths. And as you might think, right now, a lot of students are writing about COVID, about kind of how they've endured it, how they've overcome it. And the Common App has added some questions about COVID because I think the intent is they want the student to write an essay that's not COVID related because admission counselors are getting so many essays that are about how students have dealt with COVID. So our recommendation is to choose an essay that's not related to COVID. Financial aid, this is a huge topic, and I know we're all concerned about it as parents as prices increase every year for schools. I'm just going to give you some basic information, and then we can talk more at the end. But so for our students that are applying on Common App, a lot of the schools offer a free application. I think about half of them do, but some of them do require a fee, and we can supply a fee waiver for students if they get free or reduced lunch. So we just need to know that, and it's really easy for us to apply for a waiver to get the fee waived. As we talk about cost for colleges, I always like to mention the mass transfer program, which is through the community colleges in Massachusetts. And that program is where a student goes to a school like QCC. They enter a program that they want to eventually go to a 4-year state school and graduate from. So they go to QCC for 2 years. They get an associate's degree there, and upon completion of the program, they are guaranteed admission to a lot of the state schools in Massachusetts. And not only that, All the credits from the program are transferred to the school. Um, Depending upon the GPA that they achieve, they can get a really good discount on tuition at a state school. So if you're looking to save some money, more and more students are looking at this mass transfer program. It's a great option. It's not just state schools. WPI has an agreement with QCC. Some of our technical students have gone to QCC and done their technology and computer science program, and then gone on to WPI as a junior and graduated from WPI, one of the best tech schools in the country. So if you haven't thought about that, I would maybe take a look at that on QCC's website. FAFSA, you may have heard of it. If not, you'll be thinking more and more about it. It's the free application for federal student aid application. And so that's what you're going to fill out to get financial aid for your child. And that site opens up on October 1st next year, and we'll have a financial aid night in the fall. But my recommendation is always to apply early. The funds that schools have are limited in terms of like grants and scholarship. Grants and scholarships are what we call free money that you don't have to pay back. So the earlier a student can apply for financial aid, get accepted to a school, and then you actually have to fill out an application for the individual school, a financial aid application for the school. If you can get that all done early, the better chances you have of maximizing your award. So the earlier the better for FAFSA.
I'll just mention, just because I've actually had a few students recently, seniors, bring up to me, FAFSA can be completed before your student submits any applications to colleges. That's fine. You'll just have to go back into FAFSA and note down the colleges that the student ended up applying to, but that can be done first.
This next bullet here. So when we talk about applying to schools, I think it's really important to apply to, a group of safety schools that include schools that are a little more cost effective for you. So that your child will get into a school that will be a little less expensive. So maybe targeting some less expensive schools for safety schools would be a good bet. And then scholarships, we have a lot of scholarships that funnel through us. Colleges are always sending us scholarship opportunities. There's a lot of local scholarships, and we post all that on our Google Classroom, so our students are aware. For financial aid, there's MIFA. You've probably heard of the U Fund. There's a lot of commercials on television about the U Fund. But MIFA is the organization that it's basically an organization that educates people about financial aid. And they have incredible resources on their website, the MIFA website. There's a lot of videos, training videos, but they have a live virtual webinar on Thursday, March 3rd. You might want to put on your calendar. And they do a really nice job of explaining the whole process of financial aid. It can be daunting if you've never done this. If you have a child that's already gone to school and you've filled out FAFSA, but for someone who hasn't done it yet, it can be a little daunting, but you'll get through it. And MIFA is really the organization that will help answer a lot of those questions.
Also, just to mention, if you haven't filled out the FAFSA before, a lot of my students were really concerned about this year. It was definitely the most stressful part for them was the FAFSA. How do I do that? MIFA, you can contact MIFA and they can help you with the FAFSA. But all my students that I talked to after their families filled out the FAFSA, they were super relieved. It took them about 40 minutes to complete. You need your taxes, and it's really, really straightforward. It'll tell you exactly like what line item to put into what section of the FAFSA application. So MIFA does have those resources to kind of help with specific FAFSA questions.
So this is just some general next steps. For the SAT and ACT, you might want to advise your child to start preparing for it. There's some really good resources we share with students. Researching and visiting colleges. Like I said earlier, visiting colleges it's really important. It really makes the decision a lot easier when a student has been to a school and they've seen it. Uh, Utilizing Naviance to build their college list. And, this for some students, they navigate this process more easily than others. Some, it can be a little more challenging. And we're here to help them. I always tell my students, I'll step you through every step of this. Like, don't stress out. Like, we're here. You can email me. I tell them, if your parent needs to email me too, but we're here to help your child get through this process and not have them stress out about it. It's hard not to stress out, but we do our best to kind of put them at ease. So you want to get all the facts about the costs of schools and the financial aid events. A lot of them pop up in the fall. MIFA has a lot of virtual events during non-COVID years. They typically visit the school, and MIFA reps will come to right to Uxbridge High School to meet with parents. And then just going back to extracurricular activity, GPA is really important in terms of the admission process, and then extracurriculars, which include community service, volunteering, internships, work experience. All those things play a role in the admission process. So if your child can do some of that over the summer, that's also helpful. And then we just ask you to complete the parent brag sheet, which I think for most parents, they really enjoy that. They get to kind of boast about their child, and we ask them questions about how they've grown and changed, and we ask for adjectives that would describe them, and we take all of that into account when we write our letter. So that's really helpful for us. And then just to mention again, grades are important. This year is important, and just encourage your students to do well, perform well, and we will help them along the way. So, and if you have questions.